Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 24th of August of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And of course the most important update that as a result of terrorist attack, the head of Wagner, Prigozhin, and his right hand, Dmitry Utkin, was killed as a result of that terrorist attack. That was terrible, and the Russians lost not just the businessman, not just the mercenary, not just the most famous soldier probably, or the head of organizations. The Russians lost the hero. The Russians lost the leader who was moving and leading the Russian army to the victory. And basically, currently there are no such person on the territory of Ukraine. There is no such a person in Russia who can be as famous as Prigozhin and who can do these things that he did. And this is very terrible, and this is very difficult because lots of people, there is of course the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation, Sergei Shoigu, there is Valery Gerasimov also. These two people can replace Prigozhin, but they can replace him on the paper. You know that they say that the power is not the thing that you can give to somebody. The power is the thing that you can take by yourself, that you are able to take by yourself. And Prigozhin was the man of power, because the power he had, he took this power with his own hands, with his own bloody hands, when he was storming and attacking Popasna, the settlement of Popasna, and Artyomovsk or Bakhmut. When talking about Shoigu and Gerasimov, nobody can adopt them or replace by them Shoigu, because it's not the power. Because the power, the Russians currently need to start everything from the beginning. They need to start creating their own hero, the man who will lead the Russian army to the victory. Of course, we can say that Putin is the leader, he can lead the Russian army, but Putin is not the commander. Putin is not the person who can build strategical plans to start offensive operation, to be on the ground. The only thing that Putin can do is to replace, dismiss, and adopt this or that person on this or that position. And so this is the main difference. Currently, the Russians don't have a man of power, an army leader who can do a lot of things, who can criticize the Ministry of Defense, who can stand for the soldier, and who can tell the truth to the main Russian military authorities. From now on, there is no such a person on the ground, and this is a very big loss for the Russians. Very big loss, and there is no man who can replace him. So this is the reason the Russians need to start from the beginning. For example, today the president of Russian Federation gave his apologies for people, to families whose relatives died in those planes and so on. He talked a lot about Prigozhin. He said a lot of good words about him and so on. And after all this situation, we start all this speech, the meetings with the people. We start receiving a lot of very interesting updates regarding Wagner's. A lot of channels who are very close to Wagner start reporting that Wagner teams and Wagner commanders receive an order to start redeployment process to the south, and the sources are saying that the Russians took a decision to reinforce the Russian southern southern army with Wagners who were located on the territory of Belarus. Of course, probably this is a very nice trick, very nice solution for Russian forces. First of all, this is a media thing. This is the media thing that can break the Ukrainian spirit, that can break their willing to fight. But from the other side, we have one question. If this piece of information is correct, that the Russians took a decision to redeploy Wagner forces to the south, the question is, who is going to lead this army? Who is the man who will have the spirit, who will have will to fight? And we need a lot of people to believe this person. Who can replace Prigozhin? And to tell the truth, when talking about the current situation, there is no such a person who can replace Wagner. Just one man, except one person. And today we got some updates from some Russian sources that Prigozhin will be replaced when Wagners will be redeployed to the south, that Prigozhin will be replaced by Surovikin, the king, or the, how he's called, the man of Armageddon, or the Armageddon himself. He was very close to Prigozhin. We heard that after the Prigozhin attempt military coup when he was dismissed from his position, when Surovikin was dismissed from his position. First of all, he was arrested and so on. His situation was very bad, and the Russians were planning to got him in prison. At least this is the pieces of information we got from the open source. But today, this week, we got update that he was replaced by another person, by another man, and currently there were no updates about his destiny. And now we start receiving updates that probably Surovikin will be returned and he will replace Prigozhin, and he will be in charge of Wagner's in the south in the battle of Rabotina, Urozhaina, and so on. And the thing is that Wagners are not these soldiers, is not an army whose main purpose is to defend. They are stormtroopers. So as I understand, probably there's a very high chances that the Russians will soon launch their own counteroffensive operation. And this is probably the most important thing, to start the Russian counteroffensive. And the thing is that the last victory, normal victory that the Russians managed to achieve during the special military operation took place in May, when Wagner's managed to capture Bakhmut. That was the last Russian victory in this special military operation in this year. And this is a very big problem, because if you're losing territory, if you're losing bridges, if you're losing air defense systems, if you're losing your ships, if you're losing territory, small villages and so on, you start getting tired of the situation, the level of your trust reduced, and you feel very tired of this war. And basically we can see the situation on the ground. And the final strike against the Russian spirit, against the Russian willing to fight, was the kill of Prigozhin. And currently the Russian authorities, the Russian commanders understand that they need to break the media situation, and they need to bring the victory. And not just the victory like taking under control a small village like Sako and Vantseti, where we can find two buildings, not the victory like taking under control the settlement like Novoyegorovka somewhere in the Kupyansk front line. The Russians need territory and the towns. The Russians need to capture the towns like Avdiivka, like Kupyansk, like, let's say, Velika Novoselovka, Orekhov, Gulyai-Polye. The Russians need to create the new front line. They need to return their trust to the military authorities after a line after line, a row of defeats that took place since the end of the Battle of Bakhmut. Just remember, during the previous 3 months, the Russians, of course, nobody says that the Ukrainians are winning. No, the Ukrainians are losing. The Ukrainians have had significant number of losses, but we don't feel some problems with them in comparison with the Russians. Since the beginning of the end of the Battle of Bakhmut, the Russians lost a lot of settlements on the Vremivka tactical bridgehead. Currently they have lost Rabotina. The Ukrainians managed to destroy the bridge one more time. Yesterday, the Ukrainians managed to land in Crimea and to make a small operation in this area. The Ukrainians managed to return control over Antonov Bridge. The Ukrainians managed to force the Russians to step back from the territories that was captured by the Wagners in the vicinity of Bakhmut and Artyomovsk. And finally, the Ukrainians managed to kill the Prigozhin, the head of Wagner's. A lot of losses, a lot of very small failures, and if we calculate everything, we see the big problem, not problem on the ground, not the problem like with military situation, but the problem with the spirit and with the problem with the willing to continue the special military operation. The Russians need victories, and Prigozhin was just one person who gave the Russians those victories when talking about the recent and latest phases of the special military operation. If the Russians are not able to break the media situation, if the Russians are not able to start providing the Russians victories, they will lose not from perspective of military perspective, they will lose from the spirit perspective, and probably and even the loss of the war in the spirit perspective is much more difficult and terrible in comparison with the loss in military way, because even if you lose a settlement in military way like Ukrainians in Bakhmut, they found the power and they found forces to continue regrouping and to continue counterattacking, and we see the results of that regrouping, that spiritual regrouping from the Ukrainian side. Furthermore, one more time, some sources are saying that probably Surovikin will be in charge of Wagner's. They will redeploy to the south and they will begin their own counteroffensive operation. And the main purpose of that counteroffensive operation is not just to take Malotakmachko or Orechov. The purpose is to force the Ukrainians to step back as far as possible to Dnipro and to establish the front line along the Dnipro River and maybe even to enter Zaporizhzhia. So we'll see whether it's another speculation from the Russian sources or it's true, because anyway the Russians don't have much time. Sooner or later, in a week or in 2 or 3, the Russians will be forced to start acting, because the Ukrainians are not sleeping. They will continue attacks, they will continue terrorist operations, they will continue striking Moscow with drones, they will continue killing Russian officers, Russian soldiers, Russian patriots, and they will continue doing all these things that they have been doing since the beginning of the special military operation. Now let's move to the ground. Of course, the most important, probably the most interesting event that took place during the previous 24 hours is the Ukrainian attempt to land their forces on Crimea. The Ukrainians sent 2 boats, and as a result of a small landing operation, they managed to move some infantry on the Russian shore of Crimea. They got to the shore, they started attacking just maybe in the sky, and after that the Russians have redeployed some forces in this area, and the Ukrainians tried to take a decision not to test their luck, and basically they left this territory and they moved back to Odessa. Later, some Russian sources reported that during the withdrawal process, the Russians managed to destroy the Ukrainian boats, and all the Ukrainians who landed on Crimea were destroyed somewhere in the Black Sea. Of course, without any video or photo confirmation. When talking about Kherson area, the clashes continues in this area. The Russians reported that as a result of artillery duels, 30 Ukrainian soldiers were killed, 2 armored vehicles and 2 artillery systems. As you can see, the Russians mainly use the artillery strikes, combination of artillery strikes and drone strikes. The Russians try to reduce the Ukrainian presence along the bank of Dnipro River using Lancet, guided bombs. The Ukrainians, when talking about geolocated videos, have possibility just to use drones. Something wrong with Ukrainian artillery. We haven't received almost nothing about the artillery strikes of Ukrainian forces in this area, just drones attacks. Now we're moving further to the Bradley Square, to Orechov area. Today we got a lot of updates from this bridgehead. The Russians continue bombing and shelling and attacking the Ukrainian forces in Petykhatki. There was a video how the Russian T-90 tank was attacking the Ukrainians' positions inside the settlement from the hidden position. The Russians also published the video of attacking the Ukrainian position with the cluster rounds. The Ukrainian infantry was moving along the forest lines. After that, the Russians started bombing them with the cluster rounds, just to pin them down and not to allow them to complete their reconnaissance operation or something like this. When talking about Bradley Square, as you can see, the second day in a row we haven't received nothing, from the Ukrainian side, even a single geolocated video. The main geolocations we received from the Russian side, there was just one video, probably even from the Russians, how the Ukrainians were from the Russian side, how the Ukrainians were trying to rotate their forces in the southern part of Robotyne. On this video we see how the Ukrainians sent their Bradley, and after that the Ukrainians left the building on the south, entered the Bradley and evacuated from this combat line. Also the Russians published the video how they were bombing and shelling the same building, this one, which the Ukrainians were using for rotation, or where the Ukrainians tried to make rotation. Also, the Russians during the day were bombing and shelling the northern part of the settlement, the central part of the settlement, trying not to allow the Ukrainians to accumulate their forces, to collect the critical mass, and not to allow the Ukrainians to complete the assault of the southern part of Robotyne. But as I understand, that wasn't a problem for the Ukrainians, because they were sending more and more forces to the northern part using the safe roads they have created during the first 2-3 months of the storming of the settlement. almost every single hour another and another wave of stormtroopers, assault forces were moving inside of Robotyne with one purpose: to continue the pressure, to replace the soldiers that were killed during the previous wave, and to force the Russians to step back from the southern area. Yet the Ukrainians haven't managed to do this. The Russians still control the southern area. They still have safe roads to send also some infantry and reinforcements to this area, with purpose to slow down the Ukrainians and not to allow them to capture this settlement completely. Also, the Russians established fire and drone control over the fields between Robotyne and Verbova. On this video, we see how the Russian FPV drone damaged and probably critically damaged the Ukrainian Leopard tank. As a result of that strike, Leopard was damaged and probably later was destroyed. Another video, we see how the Russians discovered the movement of Ukrainian Bradley among the fields, and also as a result of FPV drone strike, that Bradley was damaged, probably later was destroyed as a result of fire on the top of machine. And we have also the Russian sources are saying that because of a very significant accumulation of Ukrainian tanks, armored vehicles, Bradleys in the fields between Robotyne and Verbova, the Russians brought significant number of artillery systems in this area, and they opened the, let's say, some sort of line of supporting this area with Krasnopol rounds, these Krasnopol accurate rounds. And starting of today, we got a lot of videos how the Russians were using Krasnopol to destroy and to attack the Ukrainian armored vehicles also in the fields between Robotyne. The thing is that while one part of Ukrainian forces tried to storm Robotyne, another part of Ukrainian forces accumulated their very big quantity of units along this line and currently try to complete the mining process, because the Ukrainians can't proceed further, can't continue their offensive operation in the direction of Verbova, Novopokrovka, until they demine these fields, and only after that they can continue their offensive operation. And this is the reason of redeployment of Krasnopol rounds, of drone, of Lancet in this area, because now the main purpose of the Russians to discover the Ukrainian demining equipment and to destroy this equipment as fast as possible, and not to allow the Ukrainians to complete this process, because as soon as they demine the fields, they will continue and proceed their offensive operation further in direction of Robotyne, in direction of Verbova, and of course in direction of Novopokrovka. So we'll see whether the Ukrainians are able to do this or not. As a result of fierce clashes in this area, the Ukrainians lost 110 soldiers, 11 armored vehicles, and 4 tanks. Furthermore, the Russians attacked and destroyed a lot of like ammo depots and artillery systems behind Orekhov. On this video, we see another Lancet strike. The Ukrainians were trying to hide their M109 artillery system, Paladin, but those attempts were useless. The Russians discovered the Paladin, and as a result of Lancet strike, that artillery system was destroyed somewhere among the brushes on the north of Orekhov. On another video, we see how the Ukrainians were trying to hide the fuel track or ammo track. The Russians discovered that system, and as a result of artillery strike, that ammo depot was destroyed. Now we're moving further to the Vremivka tactical bridgehead. We got just probably one geolocated video from this area. The Russians managed to discover the Ukrainian tank very far to the north from the main fields on the north, on the east of Blagodatne. As a result of Lancet strike, that tank was damaged or even destroyed. Furthermore, as you can see, no updates. The Ukrainians had a lot of losses during the previous battles. Currently, they're regrouping and they're getting ready before the next waves of attack. Today is Independence Day. I'm not sure that Ukrainians are going to do anything. Also, the most important that probably the deaths of Prigozhin was unexpected to many people, and now either the Russians and the Ukrainians try to understand what they're going to do next. And the British intelligence also confirmed that the Russians took a decision to redeploy their forces, Wagner forces, to the south for some purposes. Don't forget that the last time we saw Wagners on the combat line was May. 3 months passed since that situation. Around 30,000-40,000 army will be removed back, and one more time probably Surovikin will be in charge of this small, we can say, reading quotes, army. Now we are moving to Donetsk front line. We had a lot of very interesting updates from this area as well. Mainly the Russians continue bombing and shelling the Ukrainian positions in Konstantinovka and Novomikhailivka. So the Russians continue their preparation of their offensive operation in this direction. Probably they will start this attack as well, but not earlier than Wagner's will launch their own assault operation to the north. And we got the first video from Avdiivka for the previous 2 weeks. The Russians were bombing and attacking the Ukrainian industrial area, small facility, water pump facility or something like this. A very powerful stronghold on the east of Avdiivka, a very big, very tough nut for the Russians. The Russians have been trying to crack this nut since the beginning of 2014, when this fortification was established by the Ukrainians during the first Russian-Ukrainian conflict. There are still Ukrainians, and the Russians can't proceed further to the eastern part of Avdiivka without taking this stronghold under their control. When talking about Klishchiivka and Bakhmut, Artyomovsk, we got one video, very interesting video from this bridgehead, and there were 2 videos. At least one of the video, the Russians destroyed artillery system somewhere in the vicinity of Ivanovska as a result of artillery strike, but this is just another geolocation video to show the progress and process of counter-artillery duels. The most important video we got from the north, and the Ukrainians, to be more precise, the forces of 30th Mechanized Brigade published the video of their offensive operation in direction of the Russian trenches, in direction of Zalizyanska, and probably as a result of that attack that had been taking place since the 22nd till today, till 24th of August. As a result of that attack, probably the Ukrainians managed to establish control over this territory and to force the Russians to step back. Of course, we need to have more evidence of this situation, but here's the video. Though the attack started on the 22nd of August, so not even yesterday, the day before yesterday, probably the Ukrainians wanted to keep the situation until the Independence Day, so to show like another victory, local small victory in this area. We see how the Ukrainian tank managed to get the combat positions, the forest, and after that they start bombing and attacking. After that, the Ukrainians managed to land their infantry in front of the forest, and the Ukrainian soldiers launched a storming assault operation of Russian positions in the forest. We will not watch the second part of the video because there were a lot of casualties, a lot of killed Russian soldiers in that forest, and because of that, a lot of moments, episodes of that video inside of the forest, I make a conclusion that Ukrainians, as a result of that attack, managed to capture and to force the Russians to step back. This is another very bad situation for the Russians, another great loss of the Russians on the northern flank of Bakhmut, of Artyomovsk. Of course, for now, I'm not sure whether I need to change the color of map, because this is just the only confirmation, video geolocated confirmation from the ground. Probably we need to wait more to get more updates from other mappers, from official sources, and after that we'll update. But anyway, I'm telling you that as a result of offensive operation, probably, and there is a very high chances that Ukrainians managed to force the Russians to step back from this forest, from in the vicinity of Zalizyanska. The Russians reported that as a result of clashes in this area, the Ukrainians lost another 125 soldiers, 9 armored vehicles, including 1 tank. Probably the tanks was destroyed somewhere around during the battle of that stronghold. When talking about Siversk and bridgeheads, today we also got some updates. The Russian and Ukrainian forces continue counter-drone duels in the line between Spornaya and Lysychansk oil refinery. The Russians were attacking the Ukrainian positions with drones. The Ukrainians were bombing and attacking the Russian positions with drones. So nothing special, nothing new, no changes on the ground. When talking about Liman, Tarskoye salient, we got just one video when the Russians, as a result of counter-artillery duels, managed to discover the Ukrainian Akatsiya somewhere in the vicinity of Yampol, and after that, as a result of artillery strike, that Akatsiya was destroyed in hidden position, and also the Russians managed to destroy the Ukrainian ammo depot also somewhere in this area, probably the ammo depot of that artillery system. No changes on the ground. ground. When talking about Kupyansk, we haven't received almost nothing. More updates from the Ministry of Defense about another offensive operation, about another day of improvement of Russian position on the edge of the combat line. So nothing special, nothing new, no confirmation video or photo on the ground, so just the chats and just the messages. The only geolocate video we have is destroy with Lancet another M109 howitzer Paladin somewhere on the Kupyansk front line. So this is another problem, yes, that I was talking about in the first part of the video, that the Russians tired of losing and of being defeated, because of course we see that the Ukrainians lost a lot of soldiers, a lot of armored vehicles, lots of tanks, significant losses. We understand this, but people, even if, let's say, we can make some kind of comparison, we can live in the richest country in the world, but we can be unemployed, and we can be a situation when we don't have money, even if we live in the richest country in the world. So the same situation with the Russians. Even if the Russians are able to defeat, and they're defeating the Ukrainians every single day by killing and destroying thousands and thousands of Ukrainian soldiers, we don't see any progress on the ground. And the progress on the ground, victories in battles, some progress in Ukraine opening the front line, is the only thing that the Russian soldier can understand. Not just the Russian soldier, but also the Russian society and so on. Without these victories, this war can be finished in a very unpleasant way for the Russians. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.